This is episode 2 of the Mentor series. Today I'm talking with Paul Sakrison. Paul is recently retired from KLAA in Orange County, but he's had quite the career in Southern California. The Mentor series is where I talk with somebody who has made an impact on me or the industry as a whole. This is the condensed version of this interview, so if you want to see the whole thing with lots more stories and fuller answers, head over to the members section and you can watch that there. But if you're good with this shorter, condensed version, then hang on because we're going to talk to Paul right now. Well, welcome, Paul. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you as well.
Thanks for taking a few minutes and joining me. You've been a lot of places and have done a lot of things. I know the last place you were at was KLAA, the AM 830 station in Anaheim. Before that, where were you?
CBS Radio.
Okay.
KNX, KFWB. 6 years there. Works before that. I worked at I still kept in radio part-time. I never leave radio completely when I do other things just to see what that's all about. But I worked at a web company that created, they would webify people's businesses. And businesses are very interesting to me, learning other people's businesses and how they work or don't. And creating ways where, this online system could help organize what they're doing. There was some pretty cool stuff. Worked 5 years in television.
In LA
primarily
or somewhere
chasing
else?
around an uplink truck around the country. That was very interesting and challenges galore with, they would broadcast the main show on the network, the religious network, and that has to go, man. There cannot be it's not going to work today, man. No way. So we were always finding problems. We had to do it from the transmitter site in a station in Ohio or Richmond, Indiana, actually. The transmitter failed right before we went on. And long story short, the chief engineer decided, it's a water-cooled, good-sized TV transmitter. If I put in 50-50 glycol and water for the cooling, 100% glycol would be better. He was wrong. He cooked 3 Klystron tubes.
Oh, no.
And he didn't work there anymore. They had one spare, and it took us about a day to do all that. And we finished the remote, and I was on my way, and somebody else finished that off. But it was like, what?
Well, looking back at all these different crazy things that have happened, did you ever think, when you kind of started off that, I'm going to just be amassing all these insane stories?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you don't want it to be boring.
That's true.
I started out as thinking I was going to be a DJ. Hey, everybody, go over and then you figured out in fairly short order that they got fired all the time. Their format changed or they rating sucked or whatever. And now you're gone, but the engineer is always there. It didn't matter what format it was. You're there to fix the equipment. So I went in that direction. I read back in the olden days, the 1970s, every piece of equipment came with a really extensive manual that explained everything about, C27 is this part and it does this. I mean, it was so detailed, especially like the ITC cart machines. It had all these drawings and pictures of how you align the pressure roller. And I mean, it was, you learned everything from the manual, and which you get nothing of today, right? It's like, oh, that's all top secret. You mustn't know how it works. You can't replace any chips or anything in this. You have to send it to us, and then we'll either fix it or we'll send you another one if we can't fix it. So that's kind of how I got started with it. I didn't, I took some engineering classes. So I was at the beginning of it. Actually, I started in high school when I was 15, and at KNAC, which was a little 3,000 watt station in Long Beach. And, they played rock and roll, and it seemed fit in with my musical taste at the time. And I went, I think, twice a week for a couple of years. I would play records, and then I'd also fix things. The downside to the fixing things was they had an engineer that I almost never saw, because I don't know when he came in. It must have been late at night. He probably had another job, and he'd come in at 11 o'clock at night. I never saw him, right? Named Ace. And he started figuring out that I was fixing stuff that he should be fixing. Like I'd write in a little log, I fixed this problem with I changed the pressure roller, it was bad or whatever. And he was mighty mad that I was in his work. They're not going to, son, you're taking my work. They're not going to need me. And that's not cool. And I'm 15 years old. I don't think about that kind of thing. I'm a dumb kid. So first lesson. But still, I learned how to do things. I bought some equipment for my house. My best friend, named Andre Champagne, seriously. So we had 2 turntables and a tape deck and a mixer at each end, and we took I want to say Radio Shack or somebody's wireless mic, FM wireless mic, and then we built power amps, and then we made antennas. He lived probably 2 miles from me, so we could send. Well, our previous version of this was over the phone with clip leads, so this was a major upgrade. And that worked great until the FCC moved in a block from his house. So I said, okay, we're done with that. Time to get the internship going and work in a real radio station. And I've been working in radio stations ever since. But with the on-air part of this, at one of my employers I was at for 18 years, I became the operations. I was the senior VP of operations and engineering. Big sounding title. I was the only person there that could do it. But I knew DJs. I could fire DJs. I knew program directors. I could fire directors. One of the things that owners don't like to do is fire people. Did something bad that deserved to be fired are easy to do. The ones that were awful were like, I had to let an engineer go because that station was going through really hard times financially, and eventually ended up in Chapter 11. So, it's like, sorry, man, because you think, and that was up in the Bay Area. So I'm driving the whole way up there thinking, oh boy, I got to fire this guy that has no reason to be fired. But management, hey, but you have to be not averse to management. Engineers need to understand how the operations part works, the on-air part, and they need to understand how business works, terminology, budgeting, because that's how you talk to the general manager.
Yeah.
You need something. You need to be not just sound credible. You need to be credible. You don't want to overload them with too much expense at the same time and too much capital at the same time. They have money for it, but it needs to be spread out over time. Not, I want to do all these things, and you hit them with a big load, and the first place they go is, what can we not do? Well, that becomes never do. So it actually blows up in your face. So you have to be strategic in financial requests. You're trying to help them. You're trying to keep them on the air, make it sound right and good. One of the hard things to sell is audio processing, which we engineers know that's really important. To them, It's just like, what does that do? That's an $8,000 box. That's a lot of box for, I don't know what it is. But so you kind of get that in somewhere. And then you always have the broken stuff where, the transmitter ate I did a lot of AM, so there's contactors involved. And sometimes every once in a while, something weird happens and it burns up a contactor, a bunch of fingers, or I've had a few where it just burned up, the whole end of the arm where the contact happens isn't there, and it's in little dots of
pieces
metal on the bottom of the cabinet.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, well, that's why you have extra ones.
Yes.
So you can either replace the whole thing or you can replace the part that got wrecked. But not having those on hand is a huge problem. So you have to explain to them, I need to have a certain amount of reserve equipment in case a bad day comes. I'm not going to ask for it all at the same time, but it's better than, oh crap, we're off the air. I need to order this part and we're going to be at reduced power or reduced coverage or whatever for, most of a week while they fabricate it and then ship it. So, it's business. You don't want to hurt their business.
I know you've had some really, how do I put this, fantastic events that have happened in your career. What would you say was kind of like your biggest, you just saved the day, you came in and it was just boom?
Well, KFWB, when I was there at the beginning, before they sold it, was one of the 2 news stations in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. News stations can't be off. I mean, I also did KNX. They were owned by the same people, and I had to do both. KNX had, at one point, right after we moved to the new studios, 11 different ways to get program audio to the transmitter. I mean, it went on
11?
TV subcarriers. It ran. I could run it through. We had a backup studio at Paramount Studios, so it ran when we weren't using that studio. We'd leave that potted up. It had a separate STL out to the transmitter, and they've cut it way down as they've found how reliable anything is. Got rid of the telco program lines, which became insanely expensive. Anyways, KFWB. I'm driving to work. I'm not far from the transmitter site, and all of a sudden there's a thump, and there's no sound on the air. So I call the studio and go, did you lose power or something? What happened? There's no sound on the air. And they go, we don't know. There's sound in the board here. Everything looks normal. So I go to the transmitter to see what's going on there. I'm remote switching back and forth between, there's 2 program lines and nothing on either of them. It's like, that's weird. So I get out there, and sure enough, both my main and my backup line are dead as a doornail. All of that stuff ran through the Hollywood office for Pac Bell at the time. And what the guy told me was, well, one of the power supplies for this big giant cross switch thing that connects everything through Hollywood, one of the power supplies was down and being repaired, and somebody came along and turned off the other one. Because they're supposed to switch every so many days. And there's no lockout, tag out, right? Because it's apparently the bad power supply was still there, but it was turned off because it was broken. And he literally disconnected every connection that went through Hollywood. And, as you can imagine, they went, oh, shit. And he told me it takes, they're not sure because they never did it, but he's figuring it's going to take an hour to 2 hours to fully restore.
Oh my gosh.
But he said, POTS lines will come up first because they're easy peasy. It's like, okay, good information. So I start calling we had program audio on couplers for the reporters. So I start calling there, and you get the weird, that fast busy, meaning we're broken. And one time it connected. So out come the clip leads. I don't know if you've ever done this. but I clip leaded the receiver half of the phone to a patch cord and plug that in to the input to the Optimod, and then crank the input to the Optimod way up. And we're back on the air with clip leads from a telephone. And I had my assistant bring me a Comrex hotline. Because if I've got, we had one of those at the studio and then a portable one for in the field. So we brought that out. We got that to connect. So we got on there. So the audio improved another step, and then kept listening, monitoring the program lines. And then eventually they came on and pulled out the patch cord, turned down the Optimod because it was just jammed. And then they were back on the air. But that was a crazy thing. And he always remarked about, how did you know to do that? And I go, well, when I was 15 years old, I used to send audio on my little transmitter out of the clip leads of, and actually before I used the transmitter, we would feed each other shows with clip leaded into a phone. And so that experience worked out great in the end. It's like, who knew? You never knew I was ever going to have to do that. But I had that knowledge, experience.
I love the callback too, because you told the story at the beginning, and
there you go.
Here's the follow up to it. I love it. That is so cool. So you've been responsible for many transmitter sites, up in the Bay Area earlier in your career, and down in Orange County and LA.
Mostly in Southern California here.
Okay.
I grew up in Long Beach. I believe I worked at I did some work for every Long Beach licensed station except KFOX, which was 1280, I believe. Like I did a weekend of fill-in at KGER, right? I mean, that's it. And I never had to go there.
Well, with all these different transmitter sites that you've been responsible for, ultimately, did you have any that stand out to you as like a favorite?
Favorite was KNX.
KNX.
KNX is in a park called Columbia Park in Torrance. Mm-hmm. I was greatly amused by the people who would knock on the door when I was out there and tell me in no uncertain terms, very caringly, your radio station, what is this? It's a radio station, KNX. It shouldn't be in a public park. I go, yeah, let me show you this plaque here. And you go in there, and it's the city of Torrance, and they commemorated the donation of that park. It's a huge park. It's 1 mile by a half mile. It's gigantic. And there's just a couple of buildings and towers, and the walking trail kind of goes by all that, and it goes way down the street where it goes. And they realize, CBS is Columbia Broadcasting? And go, yeah, and that's why it's called Columbia Park, because they donated the property to the city. Now, it wasn't altruistic, because that piece of land had enormous property tax on it, as you can imagine. So some smart guy figured out they could donate that land and take a tax deduction for this huge donation, because the land is worth millions of dollars, and not have to pay anywhere near as much property tax.
And still have easements for the ground system.
Actually, was nobody knew the ground system was there, except for there was people at the city and the people that are in charge of the gardeners, the mowers, those guys. Like, you only mow, you don't plow, you don't whatever
disc
that is. Drag things through the field. You don't disc. It was a park, so that we weren't going to do that. But you needed to know, like, if they were going to replace grass, because sometimes you get dead spots. Like, you got to hand dig that. That's not going to be fun. But there's wires in the ground that are like 6 inches down. You don't want to break those. So I don't know that I ever had a problem while I was there. But it was a very nice site. I mean, it still had, the old timers wooden bench. It had there's a whole room full of old tubes. and it was like a flat. The base of the main tower is kind of in the building. It's kind of in a pocket, and there's a door to go out there. Don't do that while the transmitter's on, please.
No,
Lots of warning signs.
I did a tour there, and with my camera, kind of peeked. There's the fence, but I kind of peeked the camera to the fence where you can see the base, and all the lines because of all the RF impacted the camera. I'm like, oh, I hope I didn't damage my camera.
Yeah, that was pretty well. That whole little pocket that it's in was totally screened in. So the art, like you go out there with the RF meter, and it was higher than background, but it was not very high. It had
higher than my camera liked.
It had a bathroom.
Ooh,
like
that's a luxury.
Yes, sink, toilet, bathroom, which is nice because so many transmitter sites are, either nothing, like KLAA. I just rented a porta potty for a transmitter install project and then never canceled it. So if you needed to go when you were out there, you had some, because literally you had to drive 4 miles to a Jack in the Box to go to the bathroom.
So in all the years of maintaining transmitter sites, radio stations, did you ever have any nightmares? I know when I started in radio, I'd wake up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night. It's silent because I'm in bed, and it's like, I'm off the air. What's going on? And it takes me a few moments to.
And then the worst is emergency calls off the air, and the next worst is the worrying about getting an emergency call off air. And that's what really got me, especially towards the end, is I worried that something would happen, and then my brain would say, well, let's see, what might it be? And then what would you do about it? So it's like I'm pre-training my brain to be ready for this emergency that didn't happen. At KLAA, when I started, they would be, quote, off the air every day, at least for some period of time.
Oh, wow.
They weren't really off the air. They'd lose audio because they were feeding it. What was the original thing? Oh, it was on T1. And that would go down on a regular basis, especially if it rained and the backup was an ISDN. Well, the ISDN would go out before the T1 would go out. So when you go to switch to the backup, that's already dead.
Right.
So after I started there, we did some research and hooked up with your new people and on your recommendation about the satellite stuff to create a non-telco connection. All right. Now it's got a repeater point, which is not as great as just a straight shot, but the repeater is a commercial satellite that has lots of people that are paying a lot more than I am for that to be on. Those TV guys it's fix it now. That really helped. Yeah, at least over time, technology got far enough ahead that I could avoid all the bad stuff. That copper stuff, the T1 and the ISDN, that copper had been in the field for 55 years.
Wow.
And it's got, I don't know, probably 300 splices in it. Some of them were the regular splices between cables, but every time there was a failure, they would just splice it. And we said, at some point, there's this one run of it for about a mile that just splices every few feet. At some point, you're just going to want to change that, right? And they go, they won't let us. We're not putting in any new cable. Oh, great. So it's telling you, as we all are seeing now, that all the copper services are being eliminated. And, you know, your dial phone, like your POTS line for some little codec you have that's been around for a while is now costing you $400 a month. And you go, can we get rid of that? I go,
well, I want to go back earlier to your career for a moment.
Right.
I think one of the biggest things, at least for me, was having basically like a mentor, someone that I could bounce ideas off of, ask questions, well, why does this do this? Why are you doing it that way? And, did you have somebody or several people who you early on kind of looked up to in a way as like a mentor?
The first one was George Murray, who was the chief engineer of the college station at Long Beach State. Second one was Ace at KNAC. He was an ex-Navy man. There was a lot of swearing involved.
With a name like Ace, yeah.
Well, there you go. Well, it's better than Norris. You can see why he went with that. And then probably, Bert Weiner would be a big one because he knew how all this stuff worked, and he's just got such a great attitude, and like nothing phases him because it's not really his problem, and he can go on vacation when he wants, and all that stuff. But
so any of these guys that you looked up to, well, I guess I shouldn't just limit it to them. In general, what was the best piece of professional advice for, being in engineering that you ever got and that you would
just keep going and don't give up, whether it's a repair, whether it's an issue, whether it's the job. There's always another job. It often turns out to be better than the last job. The next part would be safety, safety, safety. I had a whole safety spiel at the 50,000 watts especially, where it's like, I will let you stand in the doorway to the tuning house. You don't go in the doorway. You don't point at anything inside the doorway. You just look. I will tell you, look straight ahead, look to the right, whatever. But everything is dangerous. Make do with what you have, right? You have something that'll make some power. Even if you have to run at 10%, 10% is more than no percent. And, if the studio's not that far from the transmitter, the boss will think everything's fine, until he gets on the freeway and drives far. But, things do happen, and you don't panic. At KLAA, we were able to buy a Nautel NX50, and that thing will not go off. It will find some way to stay on at some power and creep itself back up to as high as it'll let it go before it protects itself. And it's amazing. The Nautel, you hear it, right? You'll hear little clicks where it's cutting back. You'll hear it go, and it comes up, and it's like within a second or two, it's back to at least 80% power. And a lot of stuff I found in the log that I never heard, that it's amazing. I did have a weird experience with that. I don't know if we want to talk about that or not, but.
Well, it's funny, I'm not sponsored. This video is not sponsored by Nautel. Hey, Jeff, got a good commercial right here for your products.
Yes. I won't besmirch it. It was something unusual. All the problem it had, it appeared to be a high level RF plumbing problem. So I bought a new output port. We took apart the transmission line into the phaser, 10 times looking for something, or a burned part or something terrible. Nothing, right? And months go by and we have not found anything. And they come out from the factory, 2 or 3 different times with new ideas to try. And some of them were pretty radical. And, it'd run for a few days and then the problem would come back. And you looked at the Smith chart, it looks like a flying spider web. And it would protect itself down to about 1,000 watts. And, one day I said, Mike, who's my assistant, said, we're going to go to the transmitter today. And we're going to open up the doors to the NX50, and we're going to touch every part in it and wiggle it and see if it's loose. Looks funny, looks burned, or it's browner than all the ones around it. And I'm doing the back, he's doing the front. And I get to this little tiny bracket, and it's got 2 parts and three lugs on it with there's 2 capacitors on it and 1 wire. Not sure what it is. And the 2 lugs at one end, nice and tight, they're press fit. The third lug goes. It was not press fit. It was a threaded lug with a nut and a washer on the back of it. And when I wiggled that end, it moved a little bit. Okay, that's weird. So I take the bracket off, and I get a nut driver that would fit a teeny tiny metric nut and tightened it as much as I thought I could without breaking it off. And I'm thinking, yeah, this can't be it, right? It's too small a part. I should be looking for something large. And put the bracket back in, close the transmitter, turn it on, and it's been on ever since. So I call my main repair guy I've been talking to at Nautel, and I said, I think I found it. He goes, what? Well, the ground part of this bracket thing, which I had figured out was the RF voltage monitor, was a little bit loose. Could you ask the guys, the engineers,
Yeah.
what would happen if that was loose? And he calls me back the next day and goes, oh, they said it would go all hell would break loose. Tell them they're right. I said, do you keep a book on all the weird things? He goes, yeah. I go, put it in the book. It'll save everybody a lot of time if that happens to anybody else. And we don't know if it was never tightened hard enough at the factory, if it got loose on the long travel from Maine to California, or what. But it ran for a year without the problem.
How wild.
Right? When it was new, it didn't do it. It did it after a year. So it must have been just loose enough with the vibration of constant operation that it finally got. It was not loose even. I mean, you could just barely move that thing, but it wasn't a good enough contact. And it was like, wow. That was a good save. Oh, I was going to mention another thing. Learn the operation of a radio station. DJs, program directors, sales managers, general managers, because they all have their own stuff. General managers are almost always former sales managers, and sales managers are always former salesmen. So learn what they like, learn what they need, learn how to talk to them in a way that doesn't intimidate them, because they're just going to say no. If you can find a way to explain it in a simple way, they can go away feeling like they have kind of an idea of what happened or what's going on. And, it's not going to happen again for a long time, or, whatever. Or it's likely to happen again soon. So we're going to buy some parts for it and whatever. So you can reassure them sanely and not just make up a complete BS story. Because that just blows up in your face later.
So in the last minute or so that we have, what do you see as the future of broadcasting? I mean, we've seen automation come into play and, talking about Nautel, and where do you see broadcasting going in the next, say, 5, 10 plus years?
It's hard to know. I'm very nervous about owners and managers thinking it's over. There are still people, some of them need to learn how to run a business that isn't a station that isn't number one. Because a lot of the stations I worked at were not number one, but we made good money. The country station in Orange County, you're up against a big station in LA, but everybody got paid. There was money to buy stuff. It was a good job. He was able to buy more stations up and down California because we didn't have to be number one, because you saw the guys that did, I got to be number one, and they overspent on promotion and, talent. Some of them were just like, this guy is not $1 million a year talent. And I just think the point of radio is to provide something that will attract an audience to hear your commercials. Mm-hmm. This is for obviously commercial stations. So just like with billboards, they count how many people drive by this billboard every day. The people at KLAA were former billboard people. So I learned how to communicate to them. It's like, this is your sign. This is your freeway. How many people drive by this sign every day, right? That's where the value comes from. Well, similarly, because you're displaying these ads to the people on the freeway. That's why they're there. But on the radio, you're there to do something with entertainment usually, or talk or news or whatever, to gather an audience to listen to your station and be exposed to ads. And if you do too many ads, they will leave. If you do too few ads, you won't make enough money. So you need to, what you pay for a station needs to be figured out for what it's worth.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me. And, I want to do these interviews. Just, there are some people who are coming in. There are few and far between, but there are a few, and to kind of show, look, there are people out there who you can count on as mentors and who are willing to impart these wisdom on you.
I would encourage them to, if you have to get a regular job and intern or volunteer or something, to get started at a real radio station with a really good engineer, chief engineer, and have him start teaching you stuff. And then you get a helper job where you're getting paid some. Then you've got a couple of part-time jobs. And that'll help immensely, because you're somebody not from out of the blue. You're from here. Or you said, I was at XYZ, and you go, oh, well, that guy's great. I'll hire you as an assistant. And it gives you credibility. It gives you knowledge. Yeah. And you may not be able to start at the top of the ladder, but you don't really want to, because the pressure on you is immense. And if you can learn as much as you can from these people, and if you don't do stupid stuff, you'll advance, because a lot of other people do stupid stuff. And so if you remain credible, and reliable, that's how it works. That's how any business, they're looking for people that'll show up and do the work and add to. You're a value add. And it's been I made my whole life doing this. It was always great. You have all the crazy remotes and wacky morning guys and stuff, and it would, most of the time they're funny, and sometimes they drive you crazy, and that's part of the fun. But anyways, it's I've been doing it for a long time. I retired about 1.5 years ago now, and for medical reasons.
Do you still worry about those calls coming in?
I don't now. It took a year for that to go away. It's like they're not going to call.
Well, thank you again for coming on and spending an hour and whatever it's been chatting, and I really appreciate it. So thank you very much. Thank you for watching this episode of the Mentor Series. To see others in this series, click the playlist right here. To see this episode unedited, it is available in the members only section right here. And until next time, I really thank you for being a part of this channel. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep learning.